Alright, welcome to this video in which I'm going to talk you through the 4 steps to sustainable maintenance cost reduction. Now, to be clear, nothing I share in this video is particularly groundbreaking or really new. Instead, I'm going to give you a simple framework that I've used myself in the past and one that I know really works. Now, before we're going to delve into details, let me share a little bit about myself. My name is Eric Epier, and I grew up in the Netherlands, which explains the accent. And for the last 23 years or so, I worked for Shell and ConocoPhillips across the world. Initially in the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, the Philippines, later in the Sultanate of Oman, and since 2013 I'm based in Australia. And during my career I've worked on old assets, new assets, billion-dollar greenfield projects, onshore, offshore, oil, gas, unconventionals. I've managed small maintenance teams with relatively small maintenance budgets and large teams with very substantial maintenance budgets. My career took quite a turn back in 2018 when I started the Road to Reliability website. It was started largely out of frustration with what the industry offers as solutions. As a customer, I found that too many solutions were overly complex and often ignored the fundamental basics of good maintenance and reliability practices. And rarely was, in my view at least, enough attention paid to education and building capability in organizations, which in my view is where it all starts. So I ran the Road to Reliability website as a side business for a couple of years, and then back in November 2020, I went full-time. I now focus exclusively on online training and coaching and some consulting. But enough about me, let's get back on topic, maintenance costs. And as of 2021, maintenance costs are under pressure. To be honest, they are pretty much always under pressure, right? But in the current economic climate with a global pandemic, the pressure is really on. Apart from the tragic impact on people's health and lives around the world, there has also been a massive impact on the economy. Many jobs have been lost, and most countries, if not all, are experiencing harsh economic downturns. The Bank of England even has declared that the UK has not seen an economic downturn like this for close to 300 years. 300 years. A bit closer to home, at least for me, it was announced last year that Australia was officially in recession. That was the first recession for a good 29 years. So we all know the environment we're in, and we all know that we have to reduce our costs. And in tough times like these, when costs must be reduced, budgets must be cut. And in asset-intensive industries, the maintenance budget is often 20% to 40% of the total annual budget. So guess whose budget is going to get slashed, right? It's going to be the maintenance managers. Now, there is very little we can do about the business environment we're in, or the need to cut costs. What we can do something about, though, is how we cut those costs. We've all seen the classic approach, and we've probably been a victim of it through our careers, where you just slice 20 or 30% off the budget. You defer a large amount of work. You send a lot of people home. Job done. And look, most plants can limp along for 2-3 years before the lack of maintenance starts to haunt the equipment and eventually haunt the organization itself. By then, it's usually the next maintenance manager or plant manager who has to deal with the consequences. But that is not the sustainable cost reduction I'm after, and that's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about is a more structured, more disciplined, and a much more sustainable approach to reducing maintenance costs. Now, what I am going to share with you today is a framework only, one that you need to adopt for your business. But it's simple and it's effective. Before we go further, there's one thing I really want to make clear, and that is that maintenance costs are a consequence. They are a consequence of the amount of preventive maintenance we do. They are a consequence of how many equipment failures we experience. They are a consequence of the amount of people we have working for us, whether that be employees or contractors. They are a consequence of how efficient we are in executing the work we do. And they are a consequence of what we pay for the services, parts, and materials that we buy as inputs to our maintenance. So we have to remember, maintenance costs are a consequence of how we set up and how well we run our maintenance. Just think about it. When it comes to how you spend your maintenance budget, in basic terms, you spend your money on 3 things. On labor, whether that be your own employees or contractors. You're going to spend a sizable chunk of your budget on parts, materials, consumables, tools, and you will likely spend a good amount of money on external services, specialist technicians, OEMs, field engineers, etc. So if you want to bring your maintenance costs down, the what you need to do is pretty straightforward. You need to do less work. You need to be more productive. You need to use less materials, and you need to purchase less services. And so, like I just said, the what is obvious. The problem is the how. How do we do less work, use less materials, use less external services, pay less for what we buy, and then still achieve a good maintenance performance and high reliability? Chances are that as you listen to this video, you're thinking, look, this is all very nice, but that's just impossible. And I can understand that you feel that way. But if you look around any major industrial plant and look at what maintenance is done and how that work is done, you'll quickly see huge amounts of waste. And interestingly enough, that waste is almost always in the same areas. So when it comes to reducing maintenance costs, there are typically 4 things that you need to tackle, which is what I show here. These are 4 things you need to focus on when you want to reduce your maintenance costs. First of all, you need to address your preventive maintenance program. In most industrial sites, the PM program has not been optimized, it hasn't been reviewed for a very long time, and it often is very, very wasteful, with a lot of tasks that add no value, a lot of tasks that are done too often, a lot of tasks that aim to prevent failure modes that actually don't really matter for the business. You'll find often many tasks are poorly defined, so they're not done properly and not really effective, so you're wasting your money once again. And often you find that there's tasks missing, tasks that actually could be preventing some of your main recurring breakdowns. Experience and literature and studies show over and over again that somewhere between 40 to 60% of your PMs add little value. These tasks just waste your scarce resources and inflate your maintenance budget for nothing. So if your PM program has not really been reviewed in recent years, then from my experience, I would say you can probably reduce your workload by a good 20%, maybe more. And when you take that 20% of work away, you immediately reduce your costs. But not just for this year, or only for this year, next year, you take those costs out and they're gone for good. Now, the second area to look at is low maintenance productivity. At most industrial sites, the average day of a maintenance technician is really just full of waste. I mean, if you carefully look at how your technicians spend their day, you'll see that they spend so much time looking for parts, for tools, waiting for permits, waiting for instructions, waiting for equipment to become available. And in the end, way too little time is left to actually do productive maintenance work. And that's all because there is no structured planning and scheduling process in place, or if it is in place, it's simply not adhered to. Typically, you find a maintenance team runs with a wrench time of about 30%, which means out of a 10-hour day, you're only getting 3 hours of real maintenance work done. With an effective planning and scheduling process, you can increase that to 45%, which translates to a productivity increase of 35% without hiring any more people. So even if you don't already have planners and schedulers in place, when you move to a wrench time of 30% to 45%, you still create that 35% increase in productivity. The third area that you want to tackle is the number of equipment failures you're experiencing. It is really common to find maintenance teams doing the same repairs again and again. And too often the culture just has become focused on what I call forever fixing rather than fixing forever. And look, breakdown maintenance is expensive, it's time consuming, and it drives an organization into a reactive maintenance culture. And typically you find that maybe 5 or 10 pieces of equipment or systems account for the vast majority of your breakdowns of your equipment failures. So if you eliminate these, you can reduce your corrective maintenance cost by at least 20%, likely more. And the last big lever to tackle are your maintenance contracts. You need to look at the rates you've negotiated, because it's quite common that companies require service providers and contractors to deliver to standards that are higher than what's actually really needed. And that is waste. That drives unnecessary costs. But you also need to look at how you structured the contracts. Too often contracts have no incentivization, or goals between the companies are actually misaligned. So look at how you can motivate your contractors and your service providers to deliver a lower cost service. But with all these things, you always need to keep an eye on quality. You need to stay real about the impact on quality, because you can very quickly lose everything you've gained when you start getting quality issues. Now, the bottom line really is that you need to work with your contractors and your service providers to eliminate waste, the waste across their processes, their ways of working, their business, and then rates and costs will come down. Now, in this area, you should be targeting at least a 5% cost reduction. And so there you have a framework of 4 steps that will help you reduce your maintenance costs in a sustainable manner. And when you work through this framework, you'll find that what you once considered impossible now actually becomes very possible. And again, the secret here is to understand where your waste is and to tackle that waste. And then your costs will come down, and they're going to stay down. Now, in my last role in the corporate world, I was the maintenance and reliability manager for an LNG plant. The annual budget varied between $60 to $90 million per year, depending on the number of turbine overhauls we had to do. In that role, I developed a cost reduction program based on these very principles of improving maintenance productivity, eliminating non-value adding PMs, eliminating bad actors, and negotiating better rates and contracts. You see, no matter whether you have a big budget or a small budget, the principles really remain the same. You need to eliminate the waste. You need to focus on doing the right things and doing them well. And above all, you need to remember that maintenance costs are a consequence. They are a consequence of the maintenance you do and how well you do it. I normally recommend that you execute these 4 steps in the sequence that I presented them to you, in the sequence you see here on the screen. Starting with improving productivity, because once that's done, it gives you more capacity to get other improvements done. Now, I don't have the time in this video to go through these 4 steps in a great amount of detail, but what I will do is give you a little bit more insight with each of these 4 steps, what you should be looking to do. So step 1 is about improving your maintenance productivity. And as I said, a typical wrench time is around 30%. With proper planning and scheduling, you can increase that to 45%. And like I mentioned, that's a 35% increase in productivity without hiring any more. And when it comes to implementing maintenance planning and scheduling, there's actually a very limited investment required. So as a project, it has a really good, pretty much a fantastic return on investment. It has a really good ROI. And that's great news when you're trying to sell it to your leadership. Now on my website, I have a great little tool. It's a very simple wrench time calculator that lets you estimate how much value you can gain from implementing maintenance planning and scheduling in your organization. Now, below this video, I'll include the link to the article where that wrench time calculator is located, so you can download it and you can put it to use for your own organization. Now, I do recommend that you adopt a standard approach to planning and scheduling. There is really no need to reinvent the wheel. There's good processes out there. Use it. But probably even more important is that you use a proven framework for implementation. You see, it is the implementation of planning and scheduling where most organizations go wrong. And in the end, typically improvements, even if they are made to begin with, are often not sustained. And I always like to say that when it comes to implementing maintenance planning and scheduling, you need to bear in mind that it is a change management project. For it to be successful, you obviously need to understand planning and scheduling. And that is relatively easy to teach. But you also need to apply good basic project management principles, and even more important, you need to apply some sound change management principles. And that is where most companies go wrong, because the change management is something that is typically ignored. And then as a result, many implementations fail and the improvements are just not sustained. All right, step 2 is all about eliminating non-value adding work. And as I said, experience and literature and studies show over and over again that some 40 to 60% of PMs add little value. And these tasks waste your scarce resources. They're inflating your maintenance budget for nothing. So what we need to do is we need to get rid of them. And you're going to do that by doing a simple analysis of your preventive maintenance program. You're going to dig into your CMS and you're going to generate some basic Pareto charts. Charts that show you the PMs that cost you the most money on an annualized basis. The PMs that require the most of your labor on an annual basis. Look, this analysis should be really quick. It's easy to do yourself. It shouldn't take much effort. You don't need expensive consultants to do this for you. You do it yourself and it will be very, very insightful. And once you have these Pareto charts, you then want to get together with some of your key stakeholders and focus on priorities and start tackling these PMs one at a time. And for each task, for each PM, you want to have a look at the failure mode that it's supposed to address and ask yourself some basic questions like, okay, well, is this failure mode credible? Have we experienced it? Is the consequence of the failure actually significant enough to justify the work we're doing? And is the task we're doing effective in dealing with the failure mode? You're going to have to work through a series of questions like these, and then you can find and eliminate the tasks that don't really add value. And because you're doing it based on your Pareto chart, you're tackling the ones that are going to give you the biggest benefit. Now, you need to make sure that when you develop your new PMs or you optimize your existing PMs, that they're based on some simple reliability practices. You don't need to go off and do RCM analysis and everything else, but you do need to make sure you understand the principles, the technical reliability engineering principles under RCM, so you don't make some basic mistakes like using time-based replacements for random failure modes. It doesn't work and is a waste of your resources. So make sure you understand these principles. Step 3 is to tackle your bad actors. The few pieces of equipment or types of equipment in your plant that are responsible for the majority of your breakdowns, the majority of your corrective maintenance spend, the majority of your corrective workload. And the way you do that is once again by delving into your CMS and by analyzing your corrective maintenance history. In the previous step, we were looking at preventive maintenance. Now we're looking at corrective maintenance. And again, you're going to develop a set of Pareto charts. And they're going to show you, you're going to basically pull out the data to generate these charts that show you the worst performing equipment in terms of corrective maintenance cost, corrective maintenance effort, and failure frequency. And when you do this, you usually find that it's a handful of equipment that is behind most of your corrective maintenance pain. And together with stakeholders like operations and engineering, you're going to prioritize these bad actors and you're going to do some basic sound root cause analysis. And what you want to make sure you do now is that you identify all the underlying and contributing causes and that you don't fall in the trap of staying at the superficial cause level where you end up blaming the operators or the maintenance technician. That happens a lot, but it doesn't help you solve your issues. What you want to do is you want to really get down to the process issues, the systems issues, the management issues that are calling for these failures to not be eliminated. And those are the issues you want to fix, and then you're going to see significant improvements in your corrective maintenance workload, and you're going to see significant improvements in your corrective maintenance budget. Now, the fourth step is improving your contracts and your rates. Many organizations specify requirements that they don't really need, but these requirements do actually drive up prices. So what you want to do is you want to review your specifications and your requirements, initially internally, but then also together with your suppliers and your service providers, so that you really understand which of your requirements are driving up their costs. And then you can see which requirements you can reduce or maybe even eliminate. There are almost always win-wins possible in this space. Win-wins where you reduce your cost and your supplier actually increases profitability. Secondly, you want to ensure that you structured your contracts in such a way that you incentivize your contractors and your service providers to eliminate waste, to become more efficient, and to help you reduce your costs. And when you approach your key service providers and your key contractors the ones that really matter to your business, to your organization, and you ask them for their help and their input, you'll likely be surprised by their willingness to support your journey. Good suppliers understand the value of a long partnership. And if you have key suppliers, key contractors that don't want to play ball, that don't really want to help you reduce your costs, well, that's a telling message. That's a telling message that you're going to have to take some action. Now, this is an area where you really can and you should leverage your procurement and contracts team. Take some pressure off your maintenance team and your reliability team and reach out to your colleagues in procurement and contracts and get them to help you with this. All right, and with that, we've discussed all the 4 steps required to make a sustainable reduction in your maintenance cost. Now, we started off this session by talking about the fact that the pressure on maintenance costs has been increasing. So what do you do if you're in a real hurry to reduce maintenance costs? Well, unfortunately, you're going to still have to do the same work, but you may want to change the sequence a bit if you're really under pressure, if you're really in a hurry. In that case, I would start off with a very focused effort on your PMs and eliminate all that work that really does not need doing. In the space of 1 or 2 months, you can probably eliminate 10, 15, maybe 20% of your workload. Next, I would look at engaging a few of your biggest contractors and see if you can renegotiate rates. And in some cases, you may have to give it on some of your standards and specifications. Now, be careful when you do this, because we said you need to watch your quality, but this can often be a quick win. Because like we said, many organizations routinely specify requirements that actually don't really drive value for them, but they do add to the cost of the suppliers. So approach your suppliers, ask them, and sometimes these conversations can be really eye-opening. Now, once you've initiated that work, and I say initiate, because you don't want to wait till it's finished, you want to start tackling your bad actors. And once you've kicked that off, you want to start looking at your maintenance productivity, and I sequence that last because this typically takes the most amount of time. Normally, I would say it takes a good 12, maybe 18 months to really get a sustainable change in the way you manage your maintenance planning and scheduling, because you're actually changing the way you work. But if the pressure is on, and if you have the leadership support, you have a strong case for change, and motivated, capable personnel, then you can probably break the back of implementing planning and scheduling within 6 months. You can make significant improvements. Now, the last comment I want to make is that if you're really under pressure, you want to work these improvements, like I kind of hinted at, in parallel. But just keep in mind that any organization can only work on so many things at the same time, and that will also go for your team. There's only so much work that they can do. So be selective, be strategic. Now, that said, I want to leave you with a quote from Bill Gates, and it is really relevant to everything we've just been talking about. And that is that we tend to overestimate what we can do in 1 year and underestimate what we can do in 10. And that applies especially when it comes to reducing maintenance costs. You'll be amazed by how far you can bring your maintenance costs down and still maintain or even improve your performance.